By the time the delegate from the Ver Dominion finished laughing on the council floor, 3 human envoys were already dead, and everyone in the chamber knew the line had been crossed. Their blood was still wet on the white stone of the rotunda of Accord, bright and obscene beneath the floating sigils of interstellar law. The Ver claimed it had been an accident, a security panic, an unfortunate discharge by nervous guards after aggressive movement from the Terran delegation. But every recorder drone in the hall had captured the truth from 12 angles. The human ambassador had not even been standing. She had been signing a ceasefire petition across the table when the plasma bolt opened her chest. One aide died shielding the legal archives. Another died trying to stop the chamber doors from locking. The Ver minister rose over their bodies and demanded sanctions against Earth for escalatory posturing. And when the human representative from Luna, pale with shock and blood on his sleeves, asked if the council would detain the shooters under treaty law, the rotunda answered with silence. Not shock, not grief. Calculation. Across the tiers of the chamber, diplomats looked away, or whispered, or pretended to consult procedural tablets while the Ver guards dragged the bodies from the floor. The Kel Combine abstained from comment. The merchant houses of Ilya requested a recess. The 6 throned clerics of Hesh urged restraint from all parties, as if the dead had somehow fired first. Only the small embassies from the frontier worlds showed anything like outrage, and they were too weak to matter. The cameras stayed live. The whole galaxy watched the oldest institution in known space decide, in real time, whether human lives counted as lives at all. Earth's surviving delegate said only one sentence before security muted his channel and removed him from the hall. Record that humanity asked for law. Then he left, and the council, relieved to hear no threats, mistook composure for helplessness. That mistake had a history. For 27 years, humanity had endured insult with a discipline the older species found difficult to understand. When Terran merchant convoys were shaken down at Ver checkpoints, Earth filed protests. When colonial charters were blocked, humans appealed to arbitration. When an agricultural station over New Carthage was burned by privateers flying Dominion colors, Terran investigators collected debris, presented evidence, and waited for sanctions that never came. Again and again, the response from Earth was measured, procedural, infuriatingly calm. Human admirals did not posture in the news feeds. Human politicians did not pound tables. Human fleets stayed inside treaty lanes and registered every jump. To the species that had clawed their way into power through spectacle and terror, restraint looked like fear. Law looked like dependence. Silence looked like surrender. The Ver had built an empire on reading weakness quickly and exploiting it faster. They were large, scaled, armored creatures who carried themselves with theatrical confidence and thought strategy was mostly a question of momentum. Their economy fed on intimidation. Their diplomacy functioned like a smiling siege. Smaller worlds submitted because the Ver never stopped pushing. They seized trade routes, rewrote customs codes, placed advisors in orbital ministries, and called it security assistance. In private, they referred to humans as soft bloods, petitioners, a species addicted to rules because it lacked the stomach for supremacy. The fact that humanity's military remained mostly out of sight only confirmed the prejudice. The Terran fleet was known to exist, of course, but it was quiet, dispersed, and strangely absent from the power theater that dominated the core systems. The Ver concluded that if humans had real strength, they would flaunt it. humans let them conclude it. 7 hours after the Rotunda killings, before the bodies had even reached Earth, the Ver crossed the second line. A medical convoy under Council seal was leaving neutral space with the surviving human staff and the dead in stasis caskets, when Dominion interceptors emerged from shadow at the edge of the coral expanse. The Ver commander hailed the convoy, accused it of illegally transporting intelligence material, and demanded a full scan. The Terran escort, 2 treaty corvettes running blue humanitarian lights, transmitted the exemption codes recognized by every civilized polity in known space. The Ver responded with missile fire. 1 corvette vanished in a white flash. The other managed to swing itself between the convoy and the second volley, long enough to broadcast a final burst toward Earth. The burst contained 19 seconds of audio. Alarms, hull rupture, a medic screaming that the dead ambassador's casket had been vented into space, and the calm voice of Captain Elias Vorn saying, "This is a protected mission. If you fire again, history will remember that we warned you." The Ver fired again. By dawn over Geneva, the Terran Assembly had the recordings from the Rotunda and the Coral Expanse queued side by side. No speeches were made for public effect. No one on Earth demanded revenge in front of cameras. The Assembly entered sealed session. Fleet Command locked internal networks. The orbital elevators over Kenya, Quito, and Nusantara went to military control. Civilian traffic across 300 systems was rerouted with polite automated notices citing navigation updates. The quiet deepened. That quiet frightened the few aliens who understood what it meant. Among them was Council Archivist Cyril of Then, a frail, silver-skinned functionary who had spent 40 years cataloging treaties no one read. Cyril had once asked a Terran legal scholar why human diplomats took such meticulous notes, why every insult, violation, delay, and misunderstanding involving Earth was indexed, time-stamped, and cross-referenced as if preparing for some impossible trial. The scholar had answered with an expression Cyril had later come to dread. "Because when the talking stops," she had said, "we prefer not to waste time establishing facts." Now, while the Council still argued over language for a condemnation that would offend no one powerful, Cyril opened ancient Terran documents buried in legal annexes nobody but humans ever accessed. Emergency compacts, civil defense mobilization clauses, continuity of governance precedents dating back to nations and wars older than most starfaring species had language for. And beneath those, a phrase that appeared again and again in Terran strategic doctrine, wrapped in dry procedural text like a blade in cloth. Escalation dominance through silence. Cyril didn't understand it at first. Then FleetNet went dark. Not disabled, not broken. Gone. All public human military channels ceased at once. The constant low-level telemetry that confirmed the location of Terran patrol groups vanished from Council monitoring grids. Depot manifests froze. Logistics pings stopped. Even emergency transponders went black. Across human space, millions of vessels still moved, but none of them advertised anything. To most species, it looked like panic. A retreat inward. A blind, defensive crouch. In Dominion space, they celebrated. Their broadcasters replayed the Rotunda footage as proof of Terran impotence. Their admirals announced corrective actions against rogue human shipping. Their emperor, radiant beneath banners woven from conquest pledges, declared a limited policing campaign to break Earth's pattern of legal harassment. Dominion strike groups lunged toward disputed systems before the Council could even stage its next debate. Mining colonies in the Pelagos Reach were seized. Listening stations went missing. Human merchant crews disappeared after surrendering under safe passage flags. The Ver expected protests. They expected emergency motions, sanctions requests, emotional speeches, maybe even a symbolic naval deployment for their commentators to mock. What they got was a single transmission on every diplomatic band in the galaxy. It carried no music, no emblem, no preamble. Just a human voice, steady and almost gentle. The Terran Accord records that the Ver Dominion has rejected jurisdiction, attacked protected envoys, violated medical neutrality, and initiated unrestricted aggression. Civil channels are now suspended. Further communication will occur at times and places of Terran choosing. Then, even that voice was gone. The first Ver world went dark 9 minutes later. Not destroyed, dark. From orbit, Karth Vale looked intact. Its cities still stood. Its seas still reflected the sun. Its defense ring still encircled the planet like a jeweled crown. But every light on the night side had died at once. Communications vanished. Civil aviation fell from the sky. Fusion grids shut down mid-cycle. Orbital elevators locked in place. Defense batteries powered off with safeties engaged, as if some unseen authority had politely told them to sleep. Dominion High Command assumed sabotage and dispatched relief carriers. 3 carriers entered Karth Vale's gravity well and found every guidance system on their ships being overwritten by an intrusion package older than the crew's bloodlines. Their drives shut down, their reactor control surfaces locked. One captain managed to transmit a fragment before his bridge lost all function. It's inside the hardware. That was the first whisper of the thing humanity had hidden. For decades, while other empires paraded dreadnoughts and planet killers, humans had done something profoundly less glamorous and infinitely more dangerous. They had built the galaxy's infrastructure. Not all of it, never enough to alarm anyone, but enough. Terran contractors repaired beacon relays no one else could be bothered to standardize. Human engineers sold efficient traffic AI to border worlds. Terran software houses wrote clean code for custom stations, medgrids, orbital tugs, freight exchanges, climate processors, emergency alert nets, and backup control architectures. Human firms were hired precisely because they were seen as trustworthy, procedural, boring. They complied with audits. They documented everything. They built systems meant to last. Across a century of patient trade, they became the quiet skeleton inside interstellar civilization. And inside that skeleton, buried beneath legal disclaimers and maintenance kernels and dormant handshake protocols, humanity had placed a war doctrine. Not a virus. Not exactly. It was older, deeper, and infinitely more selective than malware. An architecture of conditional sovereignty. If certain red lines were crossed, attack on accredited envoys, violation of protected medical transit, mass extrajudicial aggression against Terran citizens, the systems would open like sealed doors. Human-made code would identify itself to human-made hardware, and the hardware would remember who had built it. Power grids would isolate. Navigation arrays would refuse commands. Military networks dependent on civilian timing architecture would desynchronize by fractions of a second, just enough to make weapons blind and fleets deaf. No explosions, no speeches, just darkness, precision engineered. They called it the Blackout Doctrine. The Dominion called it impossible, right up until their second world went dark. Then a third. Then their frontier bastions began falling silent in a pattern that made every strategist in the Corps go cold, because the pattern was not random. Humanity was not lashing out. Humanity was peeling the Dominion apart by layers. Outlying surveillance nets first, then logistics junctions, Then the industrial moons that serviced fleet reactors. Then the customs AI that tracked fuel, ammunition, and grain. Entire sectors of the empire remained fully lit and operational, but only long enough to feel the walls closing in. Terran systems were choosing targets with surgical malice. They were leaving civilian hospitals running on independent lines. They were sparing water purification chains. They were even maintaining minimal atmospheric controls in cities whose governments had openly celebrated the Rotunda murders. Humanity was not trying to kill billions. Humanity was demonstrating that it could. Panic began in the Dominion officer caste before it reached the public. Admirals discovered their reserve fleets could not synchronize jumps because traffic clocks across 6 sectors no longer agreed on time. Shipyards could fabricate hulls, but not authorize deployment tags. Drone swarms launched and then loitered uselessly because command authentication trees had gone read-only. Field armies on captured worlds found their supply orders rerouted, their ration printers idle, their targeting overlays blank. In one infamous incident over the occupied moon of Reth, a Ver battle group turned its guns toward an approaching Terran formation and watched in disbelief as every fire control display filled with a single white line of text. "You are operating on human maintenance, Grace." Then the guns powered down. The galaxy could finally see the Terran fleet, because now it had something to move through. Paralysis. It emerged from silence like a verdict. Sleek carriers wrapped in heat-dulling skins. Compact cruiser groups with no ornamental geometry, no ceremonial fins, no displays of dominance at all. Ships built the way human arguments were built. Tight, layered, stripped of everything unnecessary. They came not in grand parade formations, but in interlocking task elements that appeared where Dominion prediction models said they could not possibly be. Their logistics were invisible, because human civilian shipping had been preparing the lanes for weeks under legal cover no one had respected enough to notice. Their intelligence was impossible, because every Dominion command channel was compromised by infrastructure it did not know humans controlled. Their timing was monstrous. Every offensive began one heartbeat after a blackout, before the enemy could decide whether the darkness was local, accidental, or the beginning of the end. They took back Pelagos Reach in 32 hours. They cut the occupation fleet over New Carthage into isolated packets and offered surrender terms so precise that half the Ver captains signed before the rest understood the battle had already been lost. They inserted marine detachments into seized stations using maintenance shafts Terran engineers had designed years earlier. On Ver worlds, resistance cells of enslaved client species received detailed drop schedules, comms keys, and evacuation corridors the moment Terran ships entered orbit. Humanity had not spent its years of silence doing nothing. It had been listening to everyone. The Council, stunned at last into relevance, demanded emergency talks. The same delegates who had stared at dead humans on polished stone now pleaded for de-escalation, humanitarian pauses, restoration of commerce. Earth did not attend. Instead, a packet of evidence was transmitted to every public archive in known space. It contained the Rotunda recordings, the Coral Expanse attack logs, 213 prior treaty violations attributed to the Dominion, and a legal memorandum from the Terran Assembly invoking dormant clauses of collective self-defense older than most current governments. Attached to that memorandum was a note, unsigned. You were not ignored. You were measured. Then came the revelation that broke what was left of Dominion confidence. The blackout doctrine had never been the weapon. It was just the key. Once Dominion networks lost coherence, Human long-range arrays started talking to things buried in places no one had thought about in generations. Maintenance vaults under old starports, dormant manufacturing fabs sold as civilian aid packages, emergency reactor shells left in escrow around frontier moons, relay spines beneath embassy districts, sealed utility nodes beneath the council quarter itself. None of it was illegal. Every installation had been declared, audited, and filed in public ledgers. But the galaxy had treated human paperwork the way arrogant powers treat all warnings, as furniture. Now those neglected lines on forgotten annexes became doors opening everywhere at once. Dominion Home Defense learned the truth too late. Earth did not need to punch through the Imperial border in one glorious assault. It simply switched entire regions of the Empire from integrated civilization to isolated survival, while the Terran fleet advanced through gaps only humans could create. Worlds were not conquered by bombardment. They were cornered by mathematics. No reinforcements, no synchronized defense, no trustworthy command net. No certainty that the lights in the war room would stay on through the next sentence. On Vera Prime, the Emperor finally abandoned triumphal rhetoric and demanded unconditional council intervention. His message leaked before he finished recording it. The galaxy watched the ruler who had laughed at human legalism now beg for legal protection against human retaliation. But law, once mocked, had a memory. The council could not move because humanity had grounded every argument in the treaties everyone else had let decay. Earth was not outside the system. Earth had mastered it so completely that even its war moved through the channels of procedure like poison through veins. Still, the humans did not strike the Imperial Palace. Still, they did not glass cities. That was the part that terrified the galaxy most. If this had been rage alone, it would have burned hot and brief. But Terran operations stayed cold, deliberate, limited, relentless. Every hour, another Dominion admiral surrendered. Another occupied world was evacuated. Another military node lost power. Another client species declared independence under Terran shield. The Empire was being dismantled not with fury, but with standards. Then the Emperor made his last mistake. Faced with encirclement and seeing his fleets collapse into blindness, he authorized the Scorch Mandate, a contingency so brutal even some Ver generals refused it. If the Empire could not hold the border worlds, it would deny them to humanity. Fusion seeders hidden in colonial crusts would ignite tectonic chains. Atmospheres would burn. Billions, mostly non-Ver civilians, would die screaming under skies set on fire by their own overlords. The order transmitted, and did not arrive. Because 3 minutes before the Scorch Mandate hit the activation lattice, Vera Prime went dark. This time, the whole world saw it happen. Council observatories had been watching the Imperial capital for days. They saw the night side flare with traffic and panic. Then, one district after another disappear into blackness until the continents looked like severed shapes floating on ink. The orbital fortress ring tried to reconfigure and froze half open. Defense satellites lost station and drifted like dead insects. Broadcast towers cut out mid-proclamation. The Emperor's own throne citadel, a mountain of gold alloy and black stone built to survive sieges, vanished from every active spectrum except thermal, where it shone like a stranded ember in an ocean of night. Then the Terran fleet translated into orbit. Not hundreds of ships. 12. That was all it took now. They formed a quiet circle above the darkened world, while every surviving Dominion channel screamed static and override requests into the void. One Terran shuttle descended through the atmosphere under full visual lighting, white against the black. No escort, no theatrics. It landed inside the Citadel's central court after the human systems embedded in the palace security grid opened the gates from within. What happened inside was pieced together later from surviving staff testimony. The Emperor stood in a command chamber lit by emergency strips, surrounded by screens that showed nothing, while his generals shouted contradictory casualty reports and demanded weapons that would not answer. Then the doors opened and a human entered in plain diplomatic black. Not armor, not ceremony. The same surviving delegate who had been dragged from the rotunda days earlier. He walked across polished stone, still confident enough to remember outrage, and he placed a data slate on the Emperor's war table. On it was the original ceasefire petition the ambassador had died signing.
Witnesses said the Emperor asked what humanity wanted. The delegate answered, recognition. Then he laid out the terms. Immediate surrender of all Dominion expeditionary forces, arrest and extradition of the Rotunda shooters and the commanders responsible for the Coral Expanse attack, full access to prison worlds and labor camps, dissolution of occupation charters, reparations administered through independent trusts to every species harmed under Dominion annexation, permanent limitations on Imperial fleet massing, and, most humiliating of all, a formal address before the Galactic Council in which the Emperor would acknowledge that humanity had sought peace until peace was answered with murder. The Emperor called it extortion. The human corrected him. No. Extortion is what you did when you thought we couldn't stop you. Outside, the 12 Terran ships held position over a world that could no longer turn its own lights back on. No guns fired. None needed to. The Empire had reached the point every tyrant secretly fears. The moment when power is still physically present, but no longer believed in. One by one, Dominion sectors capitulated. Governors cut their own fleet links and begged for local terms. Vassal worlds raised flags that had been hidden for generations. Occupation officers stripped insignia and ran. Within 36 hours, the Ver Dominion was not dead, but it was finished as an empire. The council reconvened under the coldest silence in its history. The Emperor appeared by hardline projection from a dim chamber, his crest scorched, his voice flat with exhaustion and something worse than defeat. Shame. Across the rotunda floor, the stains from the murdered Terran envoys had finally been scrubbed away, but everyone in the chamber seemed to see them anyway. The Emperor confessed to unlawful aggression. He acknowledged violations of envoy protections and medical neutrality. He accepted Terran conditions. Then, with visible effort, he spoke the sentence the galaxy would repeat for generations. We believed human restraint meant human weakness. He stopped there, unable or unwilling to continue. But the chamber had heard enough. When Earth's new ambassador rose to answer, there was no triumph in her expression. Only iron control, and behind it, the grief of a species that had once again been forced to teach the same lesson in blood. Humanity is patient, she said. Humanity is lawful. Humanity is slow to anger because we know exactly what anger costs. We asked for process so no one would need fear what came after it failed. You mistook that discipline for submission. Let this stand in every archive from this day forward. Silence is not surrender. Restraint is not fragility. Mercy is not a gap in our defenses. It is a choice. No one interrupted her. No one laughed. In the months that followed, the maps changed. The Dominion withdrew and shrank.
Freed systems joined new coalitions under treaty frameworks mostly drafted by Terran jurists who now, at last, found eager readers. Human engineers were invited to inspect infrastructure across 100 worlds, though this time every contract was read to the final clause. Terran fleets remained visible on the borders, not menacing, simply undeniable. The smaller species that had watched the Council fail them began sending their best students to Earth for law, logistics, cybernetics, and command studies. They wanted to understand how a civilization could be so calm for so long and yet so absolute when finally provoked. The answer was never simple. It lived in human history, in old wars and older regrets, in the knowledge that unrestrained violence devours the hand that wields it. Humanity did not admire war. That was why humanity had become so frighteningly good at ending it on its own terms. They had learned to build patience into steel, memory into code, and vengeance into procedure, until retaliation no longer required rage, only decision. And somewhere above the restored lights of Earth, in a memorial garden open to every species, 3 names were carved into black stone beneath a single line of text, approved by the Assembly without debate. We asked for law. The galaxy had heard those words once and shrugged. It would never make that mistake again. Because when the Council failed, when the Empire sneered, when the caskets were torn open and the dead were thrown into vacuum, humanity did not howl or posture or beg to be feared. Humanity simply reached into the machinery of a civilization that had mistaken quiet hands for empty hands and closed its fist. Then their homeworld went dark.